Good morning, Mission Point. Sorry, that took me a few seconds longer than it did in rehearsal. It's probably those donuts I stole from the band. I knew there would be consequences. Well, like Emily said, my name is Gabe Kozer, and I have the distinct privilege, and those lights are bright, of serving as an elder here at Mission Point. And I'm so thankful. I finally get the chance to say thank you for supporting me, for praying for me, and trusting me in some of the decisions that the elders team gets to make. I really do feel like it's a privilege. And I'm really excited to be here today. As you know, we are in a series. This is the sixth week of a series we're calling Everyday Heroes, where we are taking a look at some of the examples throughout the Bible of people who were pretty ordinary people, just like you and me, except for the fact that their stories became somewhat extraordinary because they believed in the power and promise of God. And that flipped their story. And we're taking a look so we can see what would it look like for us as a church to go out into the world that we live in as everyday heroes, a chance to have an impact on others if we believe in God's promises and His purpose for our lives. As I was preparing for this week, I was reminded of the time that I was preparing to go to college. I was filling out applications and trying to figure out where I wanted to go. Some of you can remember back to that time. Some of you maybe not. But I knew a couple of things that I was looking for in college. I really wanted to play sports. In particular, I wanted to play baseball. But I wasn't recruited for baseball, so that was not an option. But I was recruited minimally for football, and so I was interested in that. And I was also interested in pharmacy. That's what I wanted to do. That's what I wanted to go to school for. So after reviewing my very limited options in those two parameters, I decided I wanted to go to Butler University. I was so excited. I'd have the chance to play football and be in pharmacy school. That's what I was looking for. And I can still remember the day that I got that letter. Remember the day you got the letter from the admissions office? And I was so excited to read of my acceptance to Butler University. So I tore open the envelope. But the letter started, "We regret to inform you," and went on to tell me that I didn't make it into Butler because of academics. I wasn't smart enough. And I was pretty surprised by that. I mean, I knew I wasn't the best student. Don't get me wrong. I knew I wasn't the best student in high school. I fooled around, probably didn't apply myself as much as I should have. But they were recruiting me. They wanted me for football. So I thought, they would take care of things. They would get me in for sure. And I had written what I thought was a pretty brilliant admission letter in which I was able to so eloquently articulate that I was interested in coming to Butler for just 2 Fs, football and pharmacy. Man, as it turns out, I was actually able to accumulate quite a few more Fs while I was there. But I knew what to do. I knew that on my own, there was no way I'd be able to get myself in that school. I didn't do well enough in high school. I didn't make the grades. But the coach wanted me there. So I called up the coach and explained the situation to him. I said, "Man, I really want to come to Butler. It's ideal for me. But here's what they said in the letter. I didn't get approved academically. It didn't happen." So the coach, kind of fumbling, said, no pun intended for the football coach, but kind of fumbling said, okay, well, let me see what I can do. So he called the admissions office, and I'm telling you, it couldn't have been 3 hours later that the admission office, the same admission office that had sent me the letter saying, "You're denied, you're not smart enough," called me and said, "Oh man, we've made a terrible mistake, it seems. We'd actually like to offer you an academic scholarship." Wow. Okay. So I went there. But you see, I knew who I had to turn to. I knew how I had to rely on. I knew who had the power to make sure that my plan would work. Actually, his plan would work. Today we're going to be spending our time in the book of Numbers. No applause? Okay. Looking at another man, the life of another man, who knew what it meant to not be enough, who knew that in himself he couldn't make God's plan succeed. But he trusted fully in what God said, trusted in God's promises, and rested in those. We're going to be taking a look, just a glimpse, at the life of Caleb, and trying to determine some of the things that we can take from Caleb's story and apply to our own lives. And in particular, we're going to look at some of the things that might keep us from enjoying and experiencing God's purpose for our lives as we live them out. Now, as we turn to Numbers 13, if you'll go there already, the words will be up on the screen, but if you'll turn there with me. I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you that I just spent a week with Dr. Larry Crabb. And Dr. Larry Crabb, if you don't know, is a pretty well-known psychologist, Christian man, a man that I respect deeply, an author. He's written several books, and a great, great man that I really admire. And Larry did a series of devotions on the book of Numbers, and he touched on Caleb too. So I'm not sure I could separate my thoughts from Larry's, Dr. Crabb's, but just assume if I say something that's a little more smarter than I might usually, it probably came from him. Now, before we jump right into the text, I want to spend some time setting the scene. What happened before Numbers 13, 27 through 29? So we know that the Israelites were held captive. They were slaves in the land of Egypt for 400 years. And God sent Moses. God went to deliver them from that land. He wanted to give them their own land, the promised land, the land of Canaan. So God calls them out of Egypt, takes them out of Egypt. He even splits the Red Sea so they can walk out on dry ground, leads them through the wilderness, guiding them all the way. And now they are on the brink of entering into the land that God has promised them, a land flowing with milk and honey, a land that has everything they would need. And God tells Moses, here's what I want you to do. Gather 12 spies. Get one leader from each tribe and send them out as spies into the land of Canaan. Go check it out. See if it's exactly what I told you it was. See if it's as good. And so Moses does what God says, and he assembles 12 men to go in as spies, go into the land. And he gives them 3 specific directions, things to be looking for. This is what I want you to look for. Check out the strength of the enemies. What is the size of the people? Are they big? Are they small? Fat? Skinny? What are they? Who are we going to be fighting? How fortified are their cities? Do they just live in cities without walls? Do they have walls? How big are the walls? Are they thick, thin? What are they like? And do one other thing for me. Will you evaluate the fruit? In fact, will you bring some fruit back so we can just get a taste before we even go into the land? Is it flowing with milk and honey? Is it as good as God says? So the spies go out, and they're gone for 40 days. And they come back. And now they're going to report. I can only imagine that the nation of Israel is just so excited to hear of the land that God has promised. After being in slavery for 400 years, walking through the wilderness, now they're excited to hear the report that the spies will have. So after 40 days, the spies come back. Now this is we're going to listen in on them giving the report to, it says, Moses and his brother Aaron and the assembly of the Israelites. So as we pick up, this is what they say to Moses. Verse 27. They gave Moses this account. We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here's some of the fruit. But the people who live there are powerful, and their cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. Those are giants. The Amalekites live in the Negev. The Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites, oh my, live in the hill country. And the Canaanites live near the sea along the Jordan. Now, there are a number of things that I want us to examine about this passage, this particular passage. And specifically, like I said, I want to see if we can draw out some things, themes in our own lives that maybe keep us from enjoying and experiencing the promises of God in our lives. And the first thing that I think might keep us or keep you from enjoying and experiencing the promises of God is that you focus more on the giants than you do on God's face. Did you see what happened when the spies came back? What were they most focused on? The giants. They came to Moses, and I think that this is kind of the language that might have happened if it were in our day, what they said to Moses. Yeah, man, we went up into the land that you sent us to, and it's beautiful. It's just like God said it was. But I just have one question for you. Are you crazy? Do you know what's up in that land? There are giants, Moses. We can't possibly overcome those giants. And their cities, oh man, do their cities have walls? They had walls up to the heavens. See, they were so focused on the giants, they no longer believed in God's promises. They could no longer see his face. God had told them he had promised them the land. He even told them what it would look like. The land I'm promising to you is flowing with milk and honey. Go check it out. See if that's the case. And the thing is, it might have been better if the spies had come back and just said, you know what, Moses, that's not actually the case, man. When we were up there, it's just more desert. And there are giants. But they didn't. They didn't say that. They didn't dispute that. It was exactly the way God had told them it would be. And yet, because of the giants and the fortified city walls, they no longer believed that God was powerful enough to deliver this land over to them. And what's worse, the people of Israel believed them too. And they actually wanted to go back to the wilderness. They even asked for Egypt, where they were slaves. You see, they wanted what was familiar. They wanted what they knew, what they could control. But God wanted something so much greater for them. But Caleb, our everyday hero, a man I want to be like, had a completely different way of looking at the same information. He saw the same things the other spies did. He walked with them through everything, experienced the same giants, saw the same cities. And yet when he came back, he gave a completely different sentence. He gives one sentence. And it says that Caleb silenced the crowd. I love that. I don't think we focus on that enough. This is over 1 million people we're talking about here. I want to know how he did that. Did he do the Peyton Manning thing? Like the Omaha? I don't know, but I love that. And he said one sentence. We should go up and take possession of the land. We can certainly do it. That's crazy. That's all he had to say? Trying to convince 1 million people after they were just told about the giants and fortified cities? Told they couldn't do it? That's all he has to say? It's such a simple statement. But it reflects such a deep truth that Caleb believed. He believed it so deeply that God had promised them this land. Why wouldn't we go up and take it? He didn't say, I think we can beat them. He said, I know God's with us. Let's go take possession of the land. It's ours. It looks just like God said it would look. He promised to give it to us. Why don't we just go take it? Caleb was able to focus on God's face. He remembered God was with him. He knew God was with him, and that he would protect them. And that he was strong enough and had power enough to see to it that they would conquer the land. I'm going to tell you some things about myself that I don't normally tell people. So I thought, what better place to do that than in front of the whole church? When I was about 8 years old, I knew that God was telling me that he wanted to use my life for some great purpose. And as a kid, I believed him. I didn't know what it looked like. I still don't. I don't have a clue. When I was about 10, my parents ended up getting a divorce. Giants. And some things happened within their messy divorce that caused me to believe that it was no longer okay for me to be myself. Fortified wall. When I was 13 years old, I had a grand mal seizure. Was diagnosed with a brain tumor. Still have it today, so you don't get focused on that. I haven't been seeing the doctor in 13 years. Everything's good. Don't worry about me. Not the point. But then there were several other things that happened throughout my childhood and adolescence that just felt like giants and fortified walls stacked against me. And the giants were too big for that kid. That kid couldn't handle it. I knew I couldn't overcome these giants, fortified walls, and I sure didn't believe God could either. So I left. I went back to the wilderness, where I knew what to expect. And I knew I could control my own environment if I were in the desert. I hated it. I didn't like it, but I knew what to expect. Now, about 7 years ago, I came back to my faith. And I was determined when I came back, I wanted to do whatever God would call me to do. I wanted to live out his purposes for my life, whatever that looked like. That's scary. That faith began to be tested seriously about 4 years ago when God asked me to go to seminary. Now, I was floored by that idea. I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that I graduated undergrad with a 2.0. I barely fulfilled the requirements to get the degree. Barely. I was terrible at school. And I hated it. Why would he call me back? Giant. And at the risk of having my degree revoked, I'll tell you, I was still addicted to tobacco when I started seminary. Talk about a giant. A terrible student who's addicted to tobacco, walking into Grace Theological Seminary. But I knew that's what God was calling me to do. I knew that's what he wanted me to do. I heard him. So I left the wilderness. I left my good-paying job for financial struggle to follow and chase after what God told me I should do. And I'm sitting here today, and I'm on the other side of this thing, and it's a lot easier to look back. I simply cannot tell you how great the fruit has been in my life because of God asking me to go to seminary, because of being obedient to that call. Man, he has blessed me in so many ways. That was hard. I didn't want to do it. But I knew he did. He wanted me to do it. Now, I know as a part of this series, the people who get up here get to recount the things that they've done successfully, or the times that they've been successful. And for me, I only get to do that for a couple of reasons. Number one, they gave me a mic. I mean, I like that. But also because that's what will fit into a 30-minute sermon. If we were to recount my failures, that would take many, many more condo-length sermons. Love you, man. What's the biggest giant for you? What is it that's keeping you from enjoying the purpose God has for you? What is it that's keeping you from living out the life He's designed for you? Is it your porn addiction? Your struggling marriage? Divorce? Your wayward child? Finances? Loneliness? Grief? Oh, or here's a big one for me. This is one I've been struggling with lately. God, how could you possibly use me to bring joy to other people's lives if I'm constantly looking to food for my own satisfaction? Oh, no, God, I'm serious. I'm going to live out your promises. I am. Just as soon as I finish this Pepsi. Oh, I mean, God, just let me have a piece of cake. It's the 4th of July, God. Oh, I need this candy bar. I'm hungry. I'm starving. It satisfies. And on we go. Giving up God's best for a Pepsi. All the Coke drinkers in here are like, phew, man. Oh, I knew those Pepsi drinkers. I think deep down, we all feel the same thing that Caleb did. We all know that if we were to live out our lives, the fruit would be just as beautiful as he said it would. The promised land would be so overwhelming. But there's something within us that keeps us from striving for that. Keep chasing after the wilderness and things that are familiar. We don't believe that God's big enough to conquer our giants. We think if we could just fix our own sin issues, if we could just fix the things that are wrong with us, then we'd be able to overcome the giants on our own. We can move ourselves into the promised land. It's never designed to be that way. We were designed to need God. We need Him to provide the way. We need Him to fight for us. I think the question for us is, are we more faithful or fearful? Do we focus more on the giants or on God's face? The second thing that I think keeps you from enjoying and experiencing God's promises is that you've forgotten who sent you in the first place. Let's look back at the first thing the 10 spies said when they came back to report to the others. We went into the land to which you sent us. They're talking to Moses. Who sent them? God sent them. This was always God's plan. And how quick are these spies to forget that this is the promised land? They don't even make mention of it. It's just the land that you sent us. This isn't some arbitrary land that Moses sends them to because he's tired of walking through the wilderness. They're on the brink of the promised land. This is where God has said, I'm taking you to this land. No mention of that. forgotten who sent them in the first place. God wanted the best for them. He wanted to deliver them into this land. This was a gift. And they treated it like it was nothing because they were giants. Can you imagine God's reaction to this? Man, who brought you out of Egypt? Who parted the Red Sea for you? Who went before you? Who led you to this beautiful land? Who provided water out of a rock for you in the desert? Who provided manna so you had something to eat? And now, because of some giants and some big cities, you question my ability to protect you? It's never about you being strong enough. It's always about him. Some giants in big cities, they show up in all of our lives. God says, who cares? You have me. I'm all you need. Don't forget who sent you. How quickly do we forget everything that he's done for us? All the ways that he's brought us out of Egypt, our own Egypt. But the minute we start to feel like something that God has called us to feels a little bit different than maybe we thought it would. Or maybe it's a little more dangerous than we thought. We start to do a little self-talk. Say something like, man, maybe it wasn't God in the first place. Maybe I just made it up in my mind. Don't forget who sent you. Let's look at what Caleb said, our everyday hero. The land we passed through and explored, this is in chapter 14. The land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into the land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. God's going to send us out amongst the giants. Will we remember that he's the one that sent us? Since I finished seminary, people are always asking me, what are you going to do next? Fair question. I ask myself the same thing all the time. And the honest answer is, I have no idea. I don't know what God's going to have me do next. I'm not sure. Jamie and I don't feel like we have any clear direction for what God's calling us to next. And my natural instinct is to question if God is truly sovereign and forget who sent me in the first place. See, right now I feel like I'm in the toughest thing that God can call you to. Waiting. I'm so bad at waiting. I want to start reaching for something. Oh God, I can do this for you. It's so easy to try to reach for something. Figure something out for ourselves. And we end up moving back to the wilderness because we want what's familiar. We want what we know we can control. When I was spending time at the conference I was in Colorado a couple weeks ago, as I told you, with Dr. Crabb, there was somebody there who watched me grow up. She was there when I was a child and watched me as I was growing up in teenage years, even into my adult years. She's seen my life unfold. And one day I went up onto a mountain. I was praying, God, God, will you just speak to me? I long to hear from you. Sometimes his silence is so deafening, isn't it? And as I came down off the mountain, he didn't speak to me there. I came down off the mountain, I ran into this woman. We talked for quite a while. But she said something that was very profound to me. She said, as she has watched my life, as she has seen my life unfold, it's almost like God has protected me and said, sin will only go so far, no further. You'll not destroy this one. He's mine. It was always him. Will we remember who sent us, even when we can't hear his voice? Will we remember who brought us out of our slavery, even when there are giants all around? Or will we feel uncertain? Or will we have to wait? Another reason, this is the final one for today, that you may find yourself not believing in the promises and the power of God is that your butt is in the wrong place. Get it? Did you ever think of that? Now, let me explain what I mean. Let's take a look back again at what the spies said when they came back. Back in the same passage. We went into the land to which you sent us, Moses, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here's the fruit. It looks exactly like what God said it would. But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw giants there. What God wanted for them came before the but to the 10 spies. This is what Caleb said. And I'm going to summarize for him because he didn't have the foresight to say it this way. No, it's true. It's true. I mean, the people in Canaan, man, they are huge. I mean, they're over 8 feet tall, some of them. They're giants, no doubt, no doubt. And their cities, man, their cities, they are large. And their walls are so thick and high. I can see the top of them. But God is with us. But God has promised us this land. So much of how we live out our lives as believers is determined by what comes after the but. How many blessings do we forfeit as God's people? Because what he wants for us comes before the but. I know God's asking me to go back to seminary, but I'm a terrible student and an addict. I know God would want me to forgive my dad, but he's hurt me so badly. I know God would want me to volunteer in church, but I've had an affair. I know God would want me to live fully for him, but I have a great job and I make a lot of money. I just know he'd want me to be poor. And we do this as a church too, corporately. Oh, we believe that God is sovereign, but ISIS is beheading Christians. I believe that God wants me to love others the way Christ loved people. But did you see what the Supreme Court ruling was this week? What will we do? I know what I'll do. I'll get on Facebook, fix this whole thing right now. Stop it. And we trade away God's best because we have our butt in the wrong place. When God asked me to move into a trailer park, I did not want to go. I was trying everything I could to not be obedient in that case. I was asking other people, I was telling other people, suggesting it to other people. Families of 8, man. Oh, it's two-bedroom trailer. I think you guys would do great there. Are you sure God's not calling you there? I did not want to do that. I did not want to move there. And a lot of people will look at me now and say something like, I really admire your willingness to move into a trailer park. I said, I wasn't willing to move into a trailer park. You want to talk about giants? I was terrified. I don't know if I slept for the first week. There were giants everywhere. I was only willing to move into the trailer hood because ultimately, I believe that's what God asked me to do. I didn't want to move in the trailer, but God asked me to. Isn't that the statement we want to live out in our lives? Isn't that better than saying something like, God wanted me to move into this trailer, but I was too scared? Isn't that better than the wilderness? I longed for what was familiar, but I wanted to be faithful. I believed that God was big enough to protect me, to protect my family. And what's more, I believed that God was big enough to use me, even me. You see, God had a plan for his people, and he has a plan for you. He wanted to lavish them with a beautiful land flowing with milk and honey. God didn't send his spies into his promised land so that they could determine whether or not they should go. He sent them so that they would know what the fight was. What are you up against? Go check it out. Go see what it is. He wanted them to know. And if God's asking you to do something, by all means, send out some spies. Check it out. See what you're going to be up against. What's the fight for you? At the beginning of Numbers, God commanded Moses to take a census. Number all the people, Moses. That's where the book's title comes from, Numbers. Clever. And when they tallied up all of the men who were of fighting age, and that's just how they did it, ladies. I'm sorry, they didn't count the ladies. You matter. We count you every Sunday. But when they counted up all the men that were of fighting age, there were 603,550 men. And out of those 603,550 men, how many got to experience the promised land? 2. You see, God sent all of his people back to the wilderness go back to the desert. And he allowed a generation to die off completely because they did not believe in his power and they did not believe in his promises. But God allowed these two men to still enter the promised land. They endured the entire 40 years in the desert. And God kept them. God allowed them to enter into the promised land because they believed in his promise. And they would not waver, even in the face of a fight. I want to be one of those too. Do you? Do we really want to take hold of everything that God has for our lives? You see what Caleb was telling the people of Israel. He said, if you only understood what was on the other side of that river, you'd be willing to forsake everything else and follow a God who's promised to give it all to us. Yes, we'll have to fight. But when you take hold of the glory that's available on the other side of that river, and you taste the goodness of God, the fight will become as nothing. Do we understand what's on the other side of the river? Are we pursuing that? And thankfully for us, there is one who has already fought our greatest battle and paid the way for us into the promised land. When Jesus Christ died on that cross and rose again victorious, like we sang today, victorious over death, he made a way for all of us to experience the promised land. If you would only believe that he is sufficient, and that with him, you can overcome any giant and any fortified wall. Are we willing to submit our lives fully to him so that he might use us as he sees fit? Or will we continue to wander in the wilderness, trying to find our own way? There will be battles. There will be giants. But God will see us through to victory if we believe that he is able. What's God calling you to? What is it he wants for your life? Will you follow him? Trusting in his power and his promise? Will you be more fearful? Or will you choose to be more faithful? Let's pray. Father, just really thankful for today. Just trust that your Spirit is moving in and among us. Lord, I beg you to fill us each with just such a boldness that we couldn't escape walking in your promise. You've been so good to bring us out of Egypt. And we know you want to lavish us with beautiful fruit. So do I, Lord. I just beg you to make that fresh in our hearts. We love you, Lord. We trust you. In Jesus' name, amen.